See joining us, and we are now being recorded. Thank you very much, Cassandra. And I'm just going to remind everyone, the participants, to keep yourselves on mute. There's quite a few participants tonight, which is wonderful. We want to make sure that everyone's able to hear what our trainer, our presenter, is talking about tonight. So just make sure you keep yourself on mute. And with that, we'll get started. So good evening to everyone online tonight on our meeting. Thanks for joining us for tonight's training on clean energy and the comprehensive plan. My name is Heather Brown, and I am the Deputy Commissioner for the Sullivan County Division of Planning, Community Development, and Environmental Management. I oversee the activities of the Sullivan County Office of Sustainable Energy. And I am thrilled tonight to be partnering with Sullivan County Planning and our friends at NYSERDA to bring free training opportunities focusing on clean energy to our municipal leaders. And once again, thank you all for joining us. It is our goal to provide training that is timely and relevant to issues that are impacting local governments. And we believe that tonight's training is a great example of that. As you may or may not be aware, December 31st, 2001, there was a draft scoping plan that was issued by New York State's Climate Action Council for the implementation of the 2019 Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is among the most ambitious climate laws in the world and requires New York to reduce economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions 40% by 2030 and no less than 85% by 2050 from 1990 levels. The public comment period is currently open until June 10th, and the plan will be finalized by the end of this year. I am posting right now to everyone in the chat a link to that plan, as well as a online form that you can utilize to submit public comment. I'm not missing an opportunity to get the word out about that plan while the public comment period is open. We do anticipate that there will be impacts to local government operations, so we highly recommend everyone to at least familiarize yourself with some of the sections of that plan. So obviously training about clean energy, integrating into your comprehensive plan is very timely and fits the bill for what we're trying to accomplish. Sullivan County has been an active participant in NYSERDA's Clean Energy Communities program for several years. We were designated as a clean energy community in 2017. Clean Energy Communities provides local governments across New York State with tools and resources to achieve their clean energy goals. And this training is part of that initiative to provide the resources to governments, local governments, in achieving their clean energy goals. So we're very happy to be able to provide this to you tonight. We are planning to have additional trainings related to clean energy throughout the year. The next one has been scheduled for Tuesday, May 24th. We're excited about that one. We're hosting a training providing an overview of the model battery energy storage system law developed by NYSERDA. So mark your calendars for that. That will be similar to the solar model laws that were kind of presented, maybe 5 or 6 years ago when the solar industry was starting to take off in the area. So I don't want to be too long-winded. We have a great presentation tonight. So with that, I want to introduce, unless I'm missing anything technical, Cassandra. I should mention Cassandra Johnstone is wonderful in setting these things up and keeps everything nice and painless and seamless for us. So thanks very much to her. But with that, I'm going to introduce,
just my one technical. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know people have questions about certificates. They'll be out in the next 1 to 2 weeks. If you need yours sooner, please just send us an email and we can shoot yours over. This training is good for 2 credit hours. And I will put in the chat the link to register for the May 24th training as well. Take it away, Heather.
Thanks. Well, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce our trainer for the evening. We're very pleased to welcome Jennifer Manier. Jennifer is the program manager for the Clean Energy Siting Team at the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, which we all commonly refer to as NYSERDA, where she helps guide local government officials through best practices and appropriate local laws and permitting procedures for solar and battery energy storage. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And with that, I'm going to put myself on mute and hand it over.
Great, thank you. Just going to get my screen share going. I assume you can hear me. Yeah. Which one did I do? 1, screen 2. Should have a slide up by now.
Looks good.
Great. And I think Actually, well, no, we'll leave the video on for now. So thank you all for taking some time out of your evening to hang out with us tonight and talk clean energy and your comprehensive plan. Some of it can get a little dry, but I'll try to keep your interest as much as I possibly can throughout. We should probably have time at the end for questions, but if not, contact information is on the slides, which you're more than welcome to get copies of after the fact. You can reach out to me anytime with follow-up questions if we don't have enough time to get to them all tonight. So just a brief agenda before we get started. So I'll do a quick introduction of myself and my team and what we do here at NYSERDA, and then we'll move into some overview material, first on clean energy technologies just in general, and then we'll get a little bit of an overview on comprehensive planning itself, and then really into the meat of what I think we're all here for tonight is how to incorporate clean energy into your comprehensive plan. And then I just have a couple slides at the end with some resources that I hope you will find helpful after the fact. So like Heather said, I'm Jen Menier. I'm a program manager at the Clean Energy Siting team here at NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Our team's role, the Clean Energy Siting team, is to help local governments all across the state, cities, towns, villages, counties, entities that you interact with sometimes, such as like IDAs, for example, to help you all prepare for clean energy development in your towns, cities, villages. A lot of communities have not seen a lot of uptake with clean energy before. It's relatively new to them. They may not have zoning laws on the books or a permitting process, anything like that. So our team's job is to, handhold as much as folks may need and help you to understand the technologies, at least at a high level, become familiar with them and plan accordingly. So many of the ways that we do that is, we're happy to provide one-on-one technical assistance to anyone who reaches out to us, be that via email, phone calls. We're always happy to come out, time permitting, and meet with you in person and have a discussion. But we also do a lot of the trainings like you're seeing here tonight. Sometimes they're virtual, sometimes they're in person. It really varies on what people want. And to complement all of that interactive technical assistance, if you will, we also have guidebooks for local governments that we've published and tried to update and maintain over the years. So those are the 4 guidebooks that you see on the right-hand side of the screen here. The New York Solar Guidebook for local governments in the top right-hand corner. We've had that one around for years. It's probably our thickest and most comprehensive document. I'll talk a little bit more about that in some of the slides today, but it's essentially anything you need to know to help prepare for solar development in your community. It includes our model solar law. There's a toolkit for municipal procurement of solar in there and lots of other great resources as well. We have a similar guidebook for wind energy systems. We do not have a model law for wind at this point, but there's still a lot of great information in there that can help you to prepare and perhaps adopt a law if you see fit. Relatively new over the last few years or so, in the bottom left there is the New York Battery Energy Storage System Guidebook for local governments. We do actually have a model law for energy storage systems, and another component of that guidebook is a copy of the fire code that pertains to energy storage systems specifically. That tends to be one of the more major concerns. So it's nice. I think it's nice we have all of that in one place. So check that out too. And then finally, the newest edition in the top left corner there is our most recent guidebook is Clean Energy and Your Comprehensive Plan. So I don't think anyone needs to be scrambling to take a lot of detailed notes or anything tonight. Just sit back and listen, and anything that you want to go back and look at again, it's probably in anything I'm saying tonight is most likely in that Clean Energy and Your Comprehensive Plan guide. And all 4 of those guidebooks are available on our website for you to download. Sometimes we have hard copies that we can mail out as well, but typically folks are just downloading the digital copies and you can look at them. They're on our website, which is on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. There's just nyserda.ny.gov/siting. And I also threw a link to the Clean Energy Communities Program as well, which is what Heather was referring to earlier. And that clean energy help at NYSERDA.ny.gov email address is not, it's not just a black hole that your emails go into. We actually do monitor it and respond. It can be sometimes the fastest way to get a hold of someone on the siting team, because when an email comes into that inbox, it gets blasted out to every single member of the siting team all at the same time. So even if one person happens to be busy that day or that week, someone else can pick up on it. So I encourage you to reach out using that email address if you have any questions or need help with something, or you just want to chat. So that's our team and what we offer. So I will move now into just sort of a brief high-level overview of clean energy in New York State, just in general. A little bit of this is some repeat from what Heather was mentioning earlier, but the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act was signed into law in 2019. So while we may have had some of these ambitious goals to begin with, we now must achieve them. We have no choice. It is the law. We must achieve these wonderful goals that we have. And that act, it's really demonstrating New York's commitment to fighting climate change and transforming our economy and just building resilient communities. The act, it also serves as the backbones of all of our state's clean energy goals. We have electricity sector goals on the left-hand side of the screen there. We need to get to 70% renewable electricity by 2030, have a 100% emissions-free grid by 2040. We also have some accompanying pretty aggressive greenhouse gas reduction goals, which is how we're going to get there, is through those electricity sector goals. We're trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 40% by 2030 and 85% by 2050. Yes, and that act also created the Climate Action Council, which is basically responsible for charting our path, if you will, to achieve all of these goals. And on the right-hand side, I'm highlighting a few of the technology-specific goals that are included in there. 10,000 megawatts of distributed solar by 2025, which is up from, I believe it was 6,000 just a few months ago. So we were already on our way to that, and we're setting the bar even higher now. Trying to get 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. 1,500 megawatts of energy storage by 2025 and 3,000 megawatts of energy storage by 2030. I would not be surprised if those energy storage goals increase in the near future too, much like the distributed solar goal did. And at the bottom of the screen there, it's just showing New York State's electricity mix over time. So it starts, the left-hand side is in 1980, if you can't see the numbers on the screen, and it goes up through 2017. This will probably be updated in the near future. And one of the things that is interesting to point out, that thick orange line that's second from the bottom, showing the contribution to electricity from nuclear sources. Back in May of 2021, Indian Point closed. Many of you may have heard about this. So if we were to update this graphic right now, that dark orange line would actually be thinner now. And so of course we need to make up that power somehow. So I expect over time that the nuclear line is shrinking. It's already shrank, and the green renewables ribbon will get bigger and bigger and bigger as long as we keep doing our jobs. So if you haven't seen a lot of renewables and energy storage coming into your communities yet, it's only a matter of time before you do. So glad you're all here today to learn how to plan for it. So a little bit about solar in general, just in case folks aren't super familiar with it. Solar photovoltaics are what you see in the pictures there. It's what most people think of when they think of solar. The panels collect sunlight and turn it into electricity. There are other types of solar as well, just to cover all of our bases. There's concentrated solar power, which is essentially parabolic mirrors that concentrate sunlight into one area altogether and use it to heat up water, for example, to create steam and turn a turbine and generate electricity that way. You're very unlikely to see any of that in New York. They tend to be out west, like in the middle of a desert somewhere. But just in case you hear about it, it's good to be familiar with what that means. And there's also solar thermal, which basically collects, radiation from the sun and uses it to directly heat up water or some other type of refrigerant to heat a building. There are quite a few different types of solar PV, solar photovoltaic installations, residential and commercial installations typically tied to a building that needs the electricity. And we refer to them sometimes as behind the meter because typically they're literally physically located behind that building's meter, and the electricity produced by those panels is feeding directly into the building that they're associated with. And they can be rooftop or they could be ground mounted, like in a side yard of the building or something like that, typically somewhat smaller systems. And then we have, like you can see on the bottom two pictures, utility scale systems, which are very large. They'll take up many acres of land, and they're essentially functioning just like any other big power plant would, just pushing energy directly into the grid for anyone to use it just as they would, like I said, from any other type of power plant. We refer to those as front of the meter because they're not tied to any individual building's meter. They're quite literally physically in front of the meter, and they're almost always going to be ground mounted systems like you see in the bottom there. There's one sort of weird little exception in that list, and that's the community solar. They are somewhat larger projects. They might take up anywhere from, say, like 7 to maybe 30 acres of land. And the reason that they're sort of in the middle there and associated with the commercial type of system, which is behind the meter, even though the community solar projects may not physically be behind a meter, they're always tied to subscribers that basically sign up to like purchase or rent out, if you will, a chunk of the electricity generated by those systems. So physically, they're in front of the meter, but they function as behind the meter because they're tied to specific utility accounts, if that makes sense. And just for a little bit of scale, typical ground mounted solar systems are going to be taking up about 5 to 7 acres per megawatt of generation. And a megawatt is approximately enough energy for 100 to 200 typical homes, depending on the size. It's a little bit about wind energy, just a bit of a primer here. You can see the different system components in the first photo there, the rotor, the nacelle, the tower, pretty basic things. A little bit about the system characteristics. We're starting to see increasing turbine capacities and sizes. They're getting bigger and producing more power, becoming more efficient. A typical average turbine is going to be somewhere between 2 to 3 megawatts. And like I said, they're getting bigger and they're getting taller. So you'll see increased rotor diameters, increased tower heights. And typically onshore wind turbines are going to be smaller than those you might see offshore. For energy storage, we have, I think, Heather mentioned you guys are going to be hosting an energy storage training too, so I'm not going to be getting into too many details about the technology. We have many hours of material. We could spend forever talking just about this, but suffice it to say, with all of the renewables coming online, the sun's not always shining, the wind's not always blowing, so we need some way to store excess energy from those systems when they're producing energy when we don't need it. And then we need a way to put that energy back into the grid when we do need it, but those systems maybe aren't producing energy. So that's where battery energy storage comes into play. There's nothing, super mysterious about these systems. They're made up of a bunch of small individual battery cells, just like the batteries you have, in your phone, your remote control, your laptop, etc. And when you string a bunch of those cells together, it makes a module. Put a bunch of those modules together, you have a battery rack, and that can be a battery energy storage system, essentially, just lots and lots of batteries all wired together in one place. And they vary drastically in size depending on what they're being used for. And all of those battery energy storage systems are also going to have a battery management system tied to them, and that's critical for operation and for safety. They're constantly monitoring the batteries, making sure nothing gets too hot or too cold. If something does go wrong, the battery management system is capable of shutting down portions of the system, even down to the individual cell level, isolating them, turning them off, and keeping everything running smoothly and running safely. Just like solar, there are a variety of installation types for battery energy storage. You can have residential and commercial systems, again, behind the meter, just sort of tied to the individual building. And it can serve as backup power, for example, in the case of a power outage. So you have your residential and commercial systems, which obviously are going to be much smaller. Residential system might be the size of a large suitcase. A small to medium-sized commercial system might, be the size of perhaps a couple refrigerators, if you will. And then much like solar, we also have utility scale energy storage systems that we refer to as front of the meter. And that's an example of one of those is in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen here. Those are essentially shipping containers filled with batteries, and even multiple shipping containers in this instance. And again, they're plugging just directly into the grid, taking energy out when there's too much, storing it, and then pushing it back in when we need more and it's not being generated somewhere else. They provide lots of other benefits to the grid as well. It's not just when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing. They also can, help the grid just function better. It likes to be in perfect balance at all times. So these battery systems are really great at, putting a little bit extra in when it's needed, taking it out, and just keeping the grid generally balanced and happy. And those large systems can be standalone, like the one you see there, but they can also be paired and co-located with large-scale renewable energy systems as well. So all three of these technologies have some land use and other considerations that you want to take into consideration when you're planning for them, right? So for all three, solar, wind, and energy storage, you want to make sure you know where you want them to go, where you don't want them to go, and have them included in your zoning so everyone is aware of what the community's wishes are, right? You want to consider different environmental impacts that they might have, what your town's bulk and area standards are, and how they fit in. Decommissioning is important for all three technologies. What is going to happen to these systems at the end of their useful life, or if something becomes damaged in the interim? And you also want to think about and plan for how you're going to tax them. More recently, we worked with the Department of Tax and Finance to release a standardized appraisal methodology for solar and wind systems that are greater than 1 megawatt. So it takes the guesswork out of how to value at least those larger systems. But yeah, so that's a consideration for all three of them. Again, that taxation is another topic that we could probably spend a full hour or so talking about. So just briefly touching on it here. So they have all of those considerations in common, but the technologies also have their own unique considerations too. So solar, for example, has visual and aesthetic impacts that you want to plan for and consider. So if they're large and they're taking up a big area where people can see it, maybe certain people don't want to look at a large solar system. They don't think it's nice to look at. So you want to think about screening and things like that. There's also potential impacts to agricultural land. The flat, wide open fields that are great for agriculture are also great for solar projects. So that's something you want to consider and balance in your town to make sure that too much agricultural land is not taken up. So that's sort of specific to solar just by its nature of taking up a lot of acreage. Wind also has visual and aesthetic impacts that are a little bit different. They don't take up a lot of square footage, but you can see them from farther away. So those visual impacts are there. They're just very different. Wind systems also have potential noise issues that need to be planned for. You want to make sure that any neighbors nearby are not going to hear the sort of like thumping sound that can be made as the blades are spinning. These things can be mitigated and studied in advance to make sure they're not going to adversely impact anyone, but it's something to consider, and you want that in any law that you adopt. And with wind, shadow flicker can also be an issue, and there are studies that can be done ahead of time to make sure that the shadow flicker, like if the sun is behind the turbine while the blades are spinning and someone lives across the street, you want to make sure they're not going to be casting shadows on their house. So things to consider when planning for wind. Energy storage, not too much. They don't really have visual and aesthetic impacts too much. They just don't take up as much space, and they're very easy to hide just behind a fence or something. So that's less of a consideration for it. But when you're packing a ton of energy into a very small space, you can imagine that fire safety becomes an issue. And again, we could spend many, many hours talking about fire safety and battery energy storage, and I think we will be doing that in a later workshop. But suffice it to say that we do have a really great fire code in New York State now, one of the most strict fire codes for energy storage in the country that we just recently adopted within the last couple of years. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. And another consideration, other than just making sure that they're all built to the Great Fire Code, is making sure that your first responders know how to respond to battery fires, essentially, because it's not quite the same as they would respond to a normal fire, just given the amount of energy that's stored in them. And that training is something that we can help with as well. Okay, so here we got just a little snapshot of clean energy in New York State. And I think the point of the image on the left is just to show that projects are going in all over the place. Like I said, if you haven't seen it yet, it's only a matter of time before you do. And over on the right, our 2020 mix of electricity still has on the bottom half there, the orange colors, a whole lot of fossil fuels in it. And if you recall a few slides back when we were talking about the goals and clean energy goals in New York State, we cannot have the orange slice down there be so big going forward. So we still have a lot of work to do, a lot more renewables to come online in the coming years. So this map on the left, I assume, will continue to fill up over time. Okay, so the permitting process for clean energy projects in New York State, both solar, wind, and energy storage, it kind of varies depending on the size of the installation and the type of installation. So for both solar and wind, because they're generators, projects that are less than 25 megawatts are permitted at the local level using seeker and any other municipal requirements that you might adopt as part of your zoning code. Projects that are over 25 megawatts are permitted at the state level. They were historically permitted through the Article 10 process, but just a couple years ago, we created the new Office of Renewable Energy Siting, otherwise known as ORES. And so those projects, those larger projects, are permitted at the state level. And then we have this funny gray zone where projects between 20 and 25 megawatts can choose to opt into the state level siting process through ORES or be permitted at the local level. And one thing that I think is very important to point out, I'll probably talk about it again later at some point, is that even for those large projects, the 25 megawatts and above that are permitted at the state level, it does not mean that you should not plan for them in your local law because, oh, the state's just gonna let it go anyway, why bother? The ORES permitting process takes local laws into consideration, and the local laws are by default what projects need to comply with. The only time ORES will override a local law, and they do have the power to do that, they will only override local laws that are deemed unreasonably burdensome. Other than that, they are taken into consideration and again are the default for what projects are supposed to comply with. So if you don't have a local law on the books, you don't really have a leg to stand on to tell ORES, this is not how we want renewable energy done in our town. If you don't have a local law, ORES has nothing to refer back to. So even for those big ones, it's still really important to include them in your planning. Energy storage is a little bit different. So where energy storage projects are paired with or co-located with one of those large scale renewable generators, either wind or solar, they will be permitted at the state level right along with them. For energy storage projects that are not paired with large scale generators, regardless of how large the energy storage project is, if it's not paired with a renewable energy generator, that's going to be permitted at the local level. So again, very important to plan for that as well. And if you don't have solar and energy storage laws already on the books, highly recommend doing so. And again, we're happy to help with that. And comprehensive planning is a great first step to start doing that. So we'll do a little bit of an overview on comprehensive planning just in general. This slide here is just showing how we define the comprehensive plan, and this definition comes from the New York State zoning enabling statutes that were amended in 1993. It's my understanding that previously we did not have an actual definition for comprehensive plan, but since then we do. And that's a lot of words on the screen. So we took the liberty of just trying to pull out some highlights from the definition. So a comprehensive plan should have descriptive material in it. It's really important that the material accurately describes and captures the character of your jurisdiction. It should also have goals, objectives, principles, guidelines, policy standards, devices, and instruments so that the scope of the comprehensive plan reflects that it's governing. It can be complex, can be multifaceted. They should also be both immediate and long range. So a well-considered comprehensive plan would be one that not only looks to protect what was, but also plans for what is now, and to the extent possible, plan for what's to come. And comp plans can be dynamic and living documents, which probably should be periodically revisited. So it's important to be forward thinking. You want to minimize conflicts and the need for revisions and edits, even if you are going to be looking at them periodically. And then finally, protection, enhancement, growth, and development. Recognize some of these goals are maybe potentially or inherently at odds with one another. So balance and consideration is the name of the game for comp planning. Okay, so the what. You want to make sure your comp plans capture what the community looks like now, as well as what it's envisioned to look like in the future. You want it to outline how the community plans to get to that future state, but also importantly, why those plans, why that future is worth preserving, protecting, pursuing, etc. And I said comp planning is a great place to start for when you are considering adopting a solar law or an energy storage law. Any of those zoning laws, your land use regulations, they must be in accordance with a comprehensive plan. So you can't really have one without the other. If you adopt zoning and you don't have a comp plan for it to refer back to, it may not have legal standing in court. So comp plan should definitely be step one. So why is it important? Like I was just saying, zoning and land use regulations need to be in accordance with the comprehensive plan. So that's an obvious reason that it's important, but there are other benefits as well. So considerations by other agencies, county, state, federal, they may look to your comprehensive plan when they're planning to do something, or perhaps, grant programs, things like that. I know have looked to comprehensive plans in the past to see which communities are perhaps best prepared to accept and use different types of grant funding. So it's good to communicate the priorities of your community in that way for various reasons. It also makes sure that your planning is not responsive to development, but proactive and thinking about it, what you want ahead of time, and not just responding to something that comes in that maybe you don't want, but you hadn't planned. So you don't know. It also just encourages communication and transparency in the community in general. It's a nice way to document the community's past, present, and future. Plenty of other reasons as well. One thing to note, similar to how I mentioned that ORES can override local laws that are deemed unreasonably burdensome, there are some state, maybe some federal government entities that have some sort of immunity from local zoning, but it's still good to, adopt a comp plan, cover your bases, and even communicate to those entities that technically have the ability to override things, what your vision is. Some of the key considerations for comprehensive planning: you want to document, study, and understand the existing conditions, what kind of land uses you have in your town, what your natural resources are. Want to solicit and obtain community input, very critical to make sure that everyone's happy with the final result. And then you want to adhere to a consistent process and structure. So there's some logic to how it's laid out. You want to have clear goals, and then define objectives and clear strategies that support those goals, and detailed implementation plans that lay out exactly how these things are going to get done, who's going to do it, and in what time frame. And then finally, of course, very important to think about funding. If you need funding to get the job done, if you don't, where you can find it, etc. So I mentioned it's important to be proactive versus reactive. These images they're sort of intended to show what the difference between maybe a board meeting that was more proactive. On the left, you don't want, basically what we're trying to show here is you don't want to have your planning process look like the room on the left, and then have, a large, perhaps controversial project coming into town that you had not planned for, and have your meeting look like the one on the right. You want to get all those people that have an opinion to show up in the planning process ahead of time and have their voices heard before something comes up that is controversial. So that's just my sort of really high level overview of comprehensive planning in general in New York State. We're going to be focused for the remainder of the presentation on how to incorporate clean energy. NYSERDA, we are not comprehensive planning gurus by any stretch of the imagination, but our friends at Department of State are. So if you are interested in getting more or different training on comp planning in general, we encourage you to go to the Department of State website and avail yourselves of the great planning resources that they have there. They do trainings as well. They also have just written documentation, and there's some examples of those in the image there that you can just look at on your own time and learn more. And on the bottom is a link to the website where you can find all of those things. So definitely encourage you, if you want more info on comp planning in general, Department of State is where it's at. Okay, so now we'll get more into the meat of how to get clean energy into your comprehensive plan. Again, Department of State, better option for more general planning resources. So why do we want to plan for clean energy in a comp plan? First reason is, it's in the name. Comp plans are intended to be comprehensive, and clean energy and sustainability are becoming increasingly important for New York communities. Land use impacts have sort of evolved over time, and it's important to reflect that in the comp plan. There are a few clear benefits of including it. It's helpful to have an articulation or representation of some sort of the jurisdiction's priorities and what your policies for clean energy. It provides clarity to all parties involved. So like municipal boards, decision makers, project developers, even homeowners, basically anyone who's looking to do a project, you want to make sure you communicate what you want from them, right? It can strengthen your position in the event of legal dispute or challenge. That's sort of going back to what I was saying, how zoning laws need to be in accordance with the comprehensive plan. So if you have one, you have a leg to stand on. And I also mentioned before, it can potentially open the door to certain grants and incentives if you've shown that you've planned for whatever you're trying to do and are ready. Backing up just a little bit. So when we talk about clean energy, it's important to know that we're not only just talking about renewable generating technologies like solar and wind. We're also talking about other technologies, strategies, and concepts that support the implementation of renewables. So things like alternative and clean transportation, residential or commercial energy efficiency initiatives, all of that stuff falls under the umbrella term of clean energy. A little bit more detail, and I said I was going to bring it up again, and here we are. It's really important to drive home how the permitting for large scale renewables happens in New York. So like I mentioned before, Article 10 has been around for many years, and it's basically a state level permitting process for large scale energy generators, including fossil fuel generators. And up until very recently, renewable energy generators were just included in that Article 10 process. It took many years for projects to get through that permitting process. And as we've been sort of drilling home, I guess today, the ambitious goals that we have in the state, we don't have time to wait 3, 4, 5 years for a solar project to get permitted. So the state created the new Office of Renewable Energy Siting that is basically replacing Article 10 just for the renewable energy projects and getting them permitted in a year or less. It like streamlines everything. They have all of the requirements that projects need to meet to be permitted through ORES are clearly outlined. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of it and makes it much easier and more streamlined to get a project permitted. What is interesting about both of them, or just important to remember, I guess, is that in order to be permitted through one of these processes at the state level, the application needs to have a statement in there as to whether or not the local jurisdiction has a comp plan and whether the proposed facility is consistent with that local comprehensive plan. And a copy of that plan needs to be provided in the application. So like I said, even though the state does technically through ORES have the ability to override local laws that are deemed unreasonably burdensome, the default is that projects should comply with any local laws and comp plans that are on the books. And if they can't for some reason, they can ask for a waiver and have to show that it's some sort of unreasonably burdensome requirement. But again, just highlighting why it is so important to plan for these projects, even if they are the larger ones that are going to be permitted at the state level. Okay, so where are we starting from? So this flow chart here is really just intended, may seem a little bit obvious, but I think it's always helpful to just see things in a little bit of a graphic format. So starting at the top, does your community have an existing comprehensive plan? Maybe it does. So yes. Was it adopted less than 10 years ago, or does it require periodic review? If so, if it's relatively recent or it has been reviewed periodically over time, maybe all you need to do is just amend the existing comprehensive plan to include some clean energy goals and objectives. If it's older than 10 years, or maybe has not undergone any periodic review, you're going to want to take a look at that old existing plan and make a decision whether you want to create a whole new one or try to update the very old one. If going back up to the top again, if you do not currently have a comprehensive plan, obviously the option is to create a new one. And within that, you have a couple options, right? You can create a plan that has a whole standalone clean energy component or like a whole clean energy chapter, or you could also choose to incorporate clean energy goals and objectives throughout your plan where they might fit in, just sort of sprinkled about. So a few different ways to go about it. And hopefully this chart is helpful to get you thinking on where do you get started in your town, depending on what you already have on the books. Okay, so moratoria, this comes up a lot, I think. So when a community is considering adopting, a solar law, energy storage law, what have you, they will often institute a moratorium saying none of these types of projects can be built while we figure out how we want to regulate them. So it should be a local law or an ordinance suspending property owners' rights to obtain development approvals for certain kinds of projects. One of the key phrases in that first line there is for a reasonable time. It's not legal to just adopt a moratorium indefinitely, just banning solar or banning wind or whatever, just for a reasonable amount of time, whatever you need to get a law on the books. I think it's typically, done in 6 months and 6-month increments. Then you often see it extended for maybe another 6 months if it takes a community a bit longer. So I'd say anywhere between 6 months to a year is probably a reasonable time to have a moratorium while you figure out and adopt a law. And during that time, you'll want to start considering drafting, adopting your plans, figure out whatever circumstances are not adequately dealt with under your current laws. You want to fix that. And how to do it, it'll require your local legislature to formally adopt and file a law or ordinance adopting the moratorium. And again, I want to highlight the term reasonable. You want to think about what kind of impacts on landowners and the community at large that having the moratorium might have. You want to be really specific about the timeline of the moratorium and the scope of what you're intending to do with that time. And just make sure that you have legal standing. Yeah. The reasonableness, I think, is a big component of that legal standing. Like I said, it needs to be for a reasonable amount of time. It cannot just be, an indefinite ban on things, or it could be, seen by judges to not be legitimate. Okay, so just going through some step-by-step how to go about it. So step 1 for incorporating clean energy into your comp plan is to adopt a policy resolution or some sort of statement asserting the goals of your comprehensive planning process for clean energy. It should state your intention to consider clean energy development in your municipal plans and regulations, and perhaps also outline any previously identified plan formats or processes, like if you are going to be making a new plan or a new component on an existing plan. So just a statement and resolution outlining all of those things, step 1. Step 2, you want to think about what kind of funding or resources you're going to require to get this done. That funding, it could be incorporated into that resolution or statement, doesn't necessarily have to be if you don't know how you're going to do it yet. You'll want to consider perhaps maybe you can use your in-house municipal staff. Maybe you don't have municipal staff who could do this. Maybe you're going to, reach out to your county or regional planning staff to see if they can help you, or if they have resources to help make it easier. You might want to look for volunteers to work on it. You might need some funding to hire consultants to walk you through the process and do a lot of the heavy lifting. And then, of course, identify any grant funding that might be out there, apply for it, figure out who's going to do that. NYSERDA at this exact moment doesn't have funding for comprehensive planning, but I know Department of State and sometimes I think DEC even through the Climate Smart Communities program has had grant funding in the past. I'm not positive right now who has what, but those are great resources to check out. Third step, identifying the body or even the individuals that are going to be charged with developing the plan. Again, that's something that could be incorporated into the resolution or statement. This body could be the local legislature, the planning board, some sort of special board or committee that you make up. But regardless of who's doing it. You want to make sure, obviously, that those individuals are educated, they're up to speed on clean energy programs that are out there, have a basic understanding of the technologies, et cetera. And then step 4, determine the existing conditions in your town. And there are lots of different existing conditions, considerations that are relevant to clean energy. And that's what's over on the right-hand side of the screen. We just listed out some examples of existing condition studies that you might want to undertake. Again, you don't have to do all of them depending on what's important to you, but it's a great place to start from if you don't know where to start. So there are perhaps energy and grid considerations, the utilities hosting capacity, how much more energy can your power lines actually hold and where, what parts of your community are close to grid infrastructure, like where would it make sense for projects to even go, so you can have some idea of what you might be preparing for. There are agricultural considerations, like I mentioned before. You want to look at what lands you have in certified ag districts or what properties have ag assessments and plan for those. Look at what types of soil you have in your community, maybe that you want to be protecting. So all of these things are great to know ahead of time before a project application comes in. There are, other environmental considerations that you might need to take into account. Maybe you have some endangered or sensitive species in your community or wetlands that need to be protected. You want to know, again, where all of these things are prior to planning out where it's going to be appropriate for clean energy projects to go. And then finally, socioeconomic considerations. Do you have disadvantaged communities or environmental justice communities in your town, and how could big projects potentially affect them? So one example, I'm going to walk through the top example here under energy and grid considerations, the utility hosting capacity. I briefly mentioned, do the power lines in your town even have the capacity to accept energy from a new project? And so one of the great first steps you can take in planning for this is to utilize the hosting capacity maps that all of the utilities in New York State publish publicly. Everyone has access to them. So they basically show all of the distribution lines in New York in various colors. And the colors indicate the capacity for those lines to basically take on more electricity. So in this image on the right-hand side here, like I believe the red lines have less capacity, so you're unlikely to see a large project be able to plug into those ones, if you will. And then like the blue lines have more capacity, so you're like, okay, those are the parts of town where maybe we should really be thinking about planning for these larger projects, because that's where they could feasibly even interconnect to the grid. And so that's a great first step to just help you visualize your local energy infrastructure and identify locations that are ripe for development. Grid proximity, the hosting capacity of the lines, your existing zoning, and what's going on in those areas already. What kind of land uses are you seeing? So that image on the right-hand side just shows an example of some of the distribution lines that you can get from those utility hosting capacity maps. Now, it does not include the high voltage transmission lines, but that data is also available. So one of my colleagues who's great with mapping tools was able to overlay the high voltage transmission lines on top of that distribution map too. And so that hot pink line that you kind of see going from the middle left down to the bottom right is a high voltage transmission line. And those are the lines where you're going to see those large utility scale projects plugging in. They need the high voltage transmission lines. Community solar, things like under 5 megawatts can plug into the other lines on the distribution grid, but the large utility scale needs high voltage transmission lines. So very good to know where they're located too. And so if you get those maps and somehow layer in your town's existing zoning map on top of it, you can start to get a better idea of where you want to be thinking about projects going. So if you see, you know, a high voltage transmission line that's very close to your, you know, dense downtown area, if you will, probably don't need to worry about the utility scale solar projects or wind projects going there, because there would be nowhere to put them. But where you see in your zoning map, if the transmission lines are perhaps overlapping with an agricultural district that has a lot of open space, or perhaps a larger industrial district, you're like, okay, there's the space here and there's the transmission lines to plug into. This is where we need to be thinking about planning for utility scale projects. And so that's what these three images here are just sort of showing the progression of what an exercise like that might look like. The one on the left showing the transmission and distribution lines. In the middle, we've overlaid the zoning so you can see how things line up. And then over on the right-hand side, the circles are just sort of highlighting areas that are either ripe or perhaps not ripe. So you can identify the areas where you're likely to see development or not likely to see development. Okay, so moving back into the steps, step 5. You're obviously going to want to design an effective public outreach and education strategy. It's important to get input from a wide range of diverse stakeholders. So for clean energy, the diverse stakeholders might include folks like utility representatives, local environmental groups, nonprofits, and of course, you know, your citizens as well. But you want to make sure all of the different brains are in the room and being heard. And so that helps you to, you know, hear what the community concerns, issues, problems, priorities are all ahead of time before some sort of controversial project comes in, right? Get all that stuff out of the way early on. And you want to make sure you include questions and opportunities focused on getting feedback from folks regarding sustainability and clean energy. So getting everyone involved, having great meetings, maybe want to, you know, offer snacks to get people to show up, whatever you got to do. Really important to make sure everyone's on board with it all along. And then finally, well, you want to create the content for your plan. That's the fun part. And I will go through, after we finish up the high level steps here, I am going to go through and show examples of what some of that clean energy content might look like. They are just examples, just to get the juices flowing, to show you, you know, what the content might look like. You can totally make up your own stuff as well, but I think it's helpful to see those things. So we'll go through some examples in just a minute here. But after you do create all of that content, of course, you need to complete the legally required process as well. So the referral of an approved plan by the planning or special board, planning board, or some special board to your local legislature. Need to have a public hearing. There's probably going to be environmental review through seeker required, possibly an agricultural review as well. And you want to establish terms for periodic review of the plan so it doesn't, you know, gather dust on a shelf and get out of date quickly. And then finally, of course, publicize, disseminate, and implement the plan, which is the best part. All right, so getting into the goals and objectives, I teed them up a little bit earlier, but they should reflect all the information that you gathered from doing those existing conditions studies and all of the public engagement sessions. So the goals are going to be longer term, more broadly focused, and then the objectives will be laying out the intentions that support those goals, and they're going to be more specifically focused. So we have some samples in the box on the right-hand side of the screen here. So for example, a goal that you include in your plan could be support the transition toward clean energy sources. You want to be supportive of it in your community, okay? But what are the objectives supporting that goal? One objective might be allowing and incentivizing individuals and businesses to use renewable energy, and, you know, for their homes. Another objective in support of that same goal might be to support the expansion of clean energy opportunities through your land use policies, plans, and regulations. Third objective, again, supporting that same goal of the transition toward clean energy sources, might be streamlining project review and approval processes so that they're efficient and predictable. So just some examples of what you might include to get the juices flowing. A different example of a goal might be balancing clean energy development and continued agricultural operations. An objective in support of that goal might be to allow clean energy projects in agricultural areas only if mitigation for agricultural impacts have been identified and addressed. Like, okay, you can do some projects here, but we want to see some mitigation if we're going to allow, a project to go on what was once farmland. Another objective might be to encourage solar or wind, other renewable energy production if it's compatible with agricultural related businesses. So you'll want, if folks can continue to do agricultural practices around the clean energy system, that's great. So you might want to encourage something like that. And there's actually a couple nice images on the right-hand side of the screen there showing just that. So it doesn't have to be all solar or all ag or nothing. Sorry, I keep accidentally changing the slides. You can co-locate and graze sheep under and around the panels. They're really great at keeping the grass mowed. I haven't seen it in New York yet that I know of, but there are also examples of, you can graze other animals, not just sheep. If you raise the panels up just a little bit higher or make room for maybe even cattle to graze under them. These things can be done. Finally, a third objective that might support the goal of balancing clean energy and ag operations would be to prioritize balanced siting of clean energy projects on priority farmland that's been identified for protection. So just some examples of goals and objectives there. Feel free to copy and paste and edit as you see fit as you're developing or updating your comp plans. A couple other just additional goals that you might want to consider. It could be achieving financial, socioeconomic, or other benefits associated with economic development. So maybe you want to, collect some tax revenue from these projects and help fund some town operations. And that's a very real benefit of hosting some of these large scale projects. So that might be a goal that you include in your comp plan. Another example of a goal is preventing, mitigating, or adapting to impacts of climate change, decreasing use of fossil fuels, diversified electric grid for resiliency, et cetera. And then of course, all of these goals, have objectives under them as well. Another goal you might want to consider is aligning with New York State goals, policies, and programs on climate and clean energy. So for example, climate smart communities, which is run out of the Department of Environmental Conservation or DEC, clean energy communities, which Heather spoke about a bit tonight. And this seminar is part of that program as well. And there are other, grant opportunities as well, but those are the two sort of dominating New York State programs there. Okay, so once we have goals and objectives, you want strategies to actually implement them, right? So you're going to want to outline specific policies and actions that support the goals and objectives that you've supported or selected. And those strategies, of course, should reflect the resources, programs, and assistance that's available to municipalities. So I did promise examples, and over on the right-hand side, and hopefully not disappointing, it's one example of how to incorporate strategies, right? So in this hypothetical goal of supporting the transition toward clean energy resources, you'll see that objective that we looked at before, where you're allowing and incentivizing individuals and businesses to use renewable energy generating facilities and do energy efficiency initiatives. But a specific strategy to achieve that objective might be to offer the real property tax law 487 tax exemption for clean energy systems. Another one might be pursuing community choice aggregation, which is basically, it allows a municipality to aggregate all of their residents and small businesses to switch them by default over to clean energy supply on their utility bills. So these are just examples of strategies that could get you there. That second objective, you saw it before, but now it has a strategy that's associated with it. So if one of your objectives is to support the expansion of clean energy opportunities in your policies, plans, and regulations, a strategy to do that would be to amend your local zoning to reflect that balanced approach to clean energy. You might want to adopt NYSERDA's model clean energy laws, which I've mentioned a few times today. Another strategy to do that might be to adopt the New York State Stretch Energy Code. So lots of options here. One more example in support of the objective to streamline the review and approval process might be to utilize clean energy specific permits and inspection processes. Maybe you want to digitize your permit applications and your fee payments and just make it easier for folks to get projects done. Again, these are just examples to get the juices flowing. Hope you find them helpful, but of course, feel free to steal liberally and edit as you see fit. And I think I'm definitely going pretty quickly. We are probably going to end early tonight. Another example here. So this goal was balancing clean energy development and continued ag operations. We talked about it a little bit. Just want to make sure we have lots and lots of examples for you to pull from. So one objective in support of that goal was allowing clean energy projects in priority ag areas only if there's some sort of mitigation that is going to be done. And a strategy for doing that could be to amend your local zoning requirements to identify and require adherence to the town's preferred mitigation strategies. So for example, you might require that projects adhere to the New York State Department of Ag and Markets guidelines for solar on agricultural lands. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Those guidelines already exist, so you can just reference them in your zoning. And it's great though, if you're not familiar with those guidelines, I'd recommend checking them out. They cover how to handle everything from pre-development of the project through construction all the way up through decommissioning to make sure that the lands are returned to the state they were in prior to the project taking place once it's reached the end of its useful life. Another objective, encouraging renewable energy production that's compatible with ag-related businesses. One strategy to do that might be to amend your local zoning requirements to encourage the co-location of renewables in agricultural activities or land uses. So if you recall, a couple slides ago, we saw a nice image of sheep grazing around solar panels. So maybe you make it easier for a project to be permitted in an ag district if they're planning to continue agricultural operations such as sheep grazing on the land, right? The third objective example here, prioritizing balanced siting of clean energy projects on farmland that's been identified for protection. One strategy to achieve that objective might be identifying specific soil categories or physical areas in your community for prioritization. Considering historic and current land uses, ensure alignment with your local zoning and other land use policies, might amend your local zoning to guide clean energy development to alternative parcels or locations, away from those priority soils. And then finally, implementation plans. So you've at this point outlined all of your goals, objectives, and strategies for how to get them done. Now we need to figure out who's going to do it, the time period in which they should be getting it done, and what resources there are available to help them do it. So the implementation plans should designate responsibilities, again, identify the resources, timelines, rolling it everything we just talked about all rolled up. And it can also be used to help you evaluate the feasibility of certain objectives and strategies. Some of them may sound really great in practice, but maybe they're currently, there's not a great resource to help you get it done. So maybe that's something that gets put on the back burner for a little bit while you prioritize things that are easier to accomplish in the short term, or that have resources or grants associated with them or something. So the implementation plan will serve as a roadmap to make sure that your plan components are completed, not forgotten, gathering dust on a shelf, right? So I'll walk you through a few examples using some of the goals and objectives that we've looked at now, seeing them all put together. So that one example goal of supporting the transition toward clean energy resources, one objective might be to streamline your review and approval process so that it's efficient and predictable. A strategy to get that done might be adopting the unified solar permit. Hundreds of communities in New York State have already adopted the unified solar permit, which is basically a template that we've provided, and you can kind of insert name of town here, adopt it, and it can be used to quickly, easily permit those smaller scale solar projects, right? Like a residential or small commercial rooftop systems. The responsible party for implementing that strategy or adopting that unified solar permit, as an example, might be the town board. You'd also want the building inspector to be involved in that. The resources to help them get that done would include, of course, the unified solar permit toolkit that is included as part of the Clean Energy Communities program. So you can find that on our website. And you can also avail yourselves of technical assistance from NYSERDA, from my team, from the Clean Energy Communities program. And that's how you would get it done. And then, insert however many months. I don't think that particular action should take anyone more than a couple months to adopt. And now I'll go through a few more specific examples of goals, objectives, strategies, etc., just to, again, get the juices flowing and show you what this looks like in the real world. So another goal, promoting clean energy technologies in, whatever your municipality is, in your services and facilities. An objective in support of that goal might be to maximize opportunities for municipal buildings and schools to use renewable energy resources. And a strategy to support that objective might be adopting a benchmarking policy for municipal facilities. So you can see which facilities are using perhaps more energy than they should be, and start targeting where you'd want to be doing upgrades, right? And the responsible party to adopt a benchmarking policy might be the municipal legislature and municipal admin staff, who could actually, do the benchmarking and keep track of these things. Resources that might be available to help, technical and program assistance from NYSERDA's Clean Energy Communities program. Every community in the state has access to the Clean Energy Communities coordinators. They're local boots on the ground, if you will, and they're there to help. And we have plenty of guidance in the Clean Energy Communities program for adopting benchmarking policies, and they're there to help. So that would be a fairly light lift as well. Plenty of hand-holding is available. Another goal was goal 3 here in the middle of the slide, supporting financial strategies that further clean energy development and decrease the cost of electricity. High-level goal. One objective within that might be to support residential and commercial clean energy projects through regulations and taxation policies. Strategy example for that might be to ensure that the real property tax law 487 tax exemption remains in place, just like I mentioned earlier, this example. In that case, the municipal legislature and perhaps the municipal assessor should be involved as well. And got plenty of resources there. Our solar guidebook for local governments that I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation has some pretty good information in there about real property tax law 487. And also the New York State Department of Tax and Finance has resources available now, especially not just for real property tax law 487, but it also, like I mentioned before, now has a standardized tax appraisal model for all solar and wind systems that are larger than 1 megawatt. If you haven't taken a look at that, highly recommend, because it's actually mandatory for assessors to use now starting this year. One more example at the bottom here, and I think I'm going to be wrapping up way early. I apologize for those of you who were hoping to hang out for the full 2 hours, but this is what's happening. So one more goal to get through. Goal 4 there at the bottom might be increase clean energy related employment, business development, and training opportunities in your town. An objective in support of that goal might be to encourage the development of education and training programs for clean energy employment opportunities. A strategy to achieve it might be to partner with local clean energy businesses to create internships and training opportunities. A responsible party there could be municipal staff and local businesses. And some resources. Local and regional planning agencies can be very helpful in trying to figure out this sort of thing. And NYSERDA also has a clean energy internship program. And that's not just, NYSERDA having interns that, work at NYSERDA. It's us supporting other folks hiring clean energy interns in their businesses, or perhaps even the municipality itself might like to have a clean energy intern to help them do some of this stuff, and we can help subsidize the cost of that. So plenty of resources available. And there, of course, like I said, all of these have just been examples to get you thinking about it and see what clean energy in your comp plan might look like once it's in there, but this is by no means comprehensive, and there are plenty of a whole nother world of goals, objectives, strategies that might be included. We just thought it would be helpful to get some potential real world, like fill in all the blanks and see how it might be done. So on the next couple slides, I just have some links to resources that I think folks might find helpful in doing your planning. I've plugged them a couple times already. I'll plug them again. The New York State Department of State, the Division of Local Government Services, has lots of great, just general comprehensive planning resources. They're all hyperlinked here. Syracuse University has a comprehensive plan development resource as well. NYSERDA, of course, lots of clean energy resources to help. Our solar guidebook is absolutely a wonderful place to start. Our energy storage guidebook as well. The American Planning Association has some great stuff. The New York State Climate Smart Communities Program, again, that's out of DEC, also has resources for updating comprehensive plans with sustainability elements too, not just energy related, but broader. And of course, some funding and technical assistance opportunities. Local, county, and regional planning agencies, again, very helpful to get you started. There are New York State resources and programs. They can change sometimes, but always a good idea to check out the consolidated funding application each year and see what's included in that. Climate Smart Communities program has grants available as well. Department of Ag and Markets often has grant programs as well. And Department of State, plug them yet again, great resources, grant programs, technical assistance, etc. So all these are great places to start. It's not comprehensive, but like I said, good place to start. So I ended way early, so maybe we have some questions that we could do in the meantime. But if not, like I said, that clean energy help at nyserda.ny.gov is not a black box for emails. It really does come to us as humans, and we really do respond. So don't hesitate to reach out, email, call, find us in person somewhere. Like I said, we're always, time permitting, always happy to drive to you and meet in person too.
Well, thank you very much, Jen. We had a couple of questions that came through, one of which is a question about how solar projects are funded. Now, I'm familiar with the New York Sun Initiative, which I can post a link to the Sun Initiative, if that would be helpful, into the chat, but I don't know if you have any information, just a kind of general overview of how that's handled.
Yeah, I can touch on that high level. So our New York Sun program provides, basically NYSERDA provides incentives for these projects, right? So New York Sun is covering everything that's like 5 megawatts and less. So residential systems, commercial systems, and those like mid-range community solar projects that I mentioned earlier. And so if you're looking to get solar, on your house or something, you basically just go to our website and find a qualified solar installer. We have a whole list of all of the installers that are qualified to install on behalf of the NYSERDA programs, and they take care of all of the incentive paperwork. We work directly with the installers, and they're required by contract to pass the incentive savings down to you. So individual, homeowners or individual business owners don't need to be filling out a bunch of different incentive paperwork, right? We just kind of funnel it through all of the approved contractors, and it's included in the price that you would pay for the system. The larger utility scale projects are funded via a competitive solicitation that NYSERDA issues every year. So these are the ones we're talking that might be dozens or hundreds of acres in size. So every year, NYSERDA puts out a solicitation asking for developers to propose projects, and if they have projects that are far enough along, they have some lease option agreements with landowners, they have an idea of what they're doing, and they tell NYSERDA, basically how much assistance they need in order to make this project happen. We essentially buy renewable energy credits from the energy that is produced from those projects that are awarded. So a bunch of applications will come in. We see which projects we can get the most energy out of for the least amount of money, basically, who's most cost competitive. And of course, other considerations as well, like have they been working with the community? Is the community supportive of it? But a lot of it comes down to, the cost per megawatt hour of electricity that's going to be produced. If the projects look viable and they score well, NYSERDA will award them a contract, but they don't get any money from us until the project is built and operating and producing electricity, at which point we purchase the renewable energy credits for every megawatt hour of electricity that they're generating. So in summary, the smaller projects have sort of upfront incentive funding to reduce the cost of building them. And those large utility scale projects, we basically promise to purchase the energy from them once they're built and operating, and it's competitive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The only other question that we had come in has to do with, I think this is on the, this would be more on the product stewardship kind of side of things, with regard to the batteries. What happens to batteries when they're no longer viable? And this is a question that I get pretty often, as far as, what's going on with the recycling of batteries or the takebacks. I know there's been some legislation that's been batted around at the state for product stewardship when it comes to some of the clean energy technologies. I don't know if that's something that you would have information on, or if that's something that would be referred to the Department of Environmental Conservation.
It's probably a little bit of both. The best answer I have right now is that we're working on it. And I'm happy to share that New York actually has battery recycling facilities happening now, which we did not have before. So I believe it's called Li-Cycle in Rochester. So we're starting to build the infrastructure that's necessary to, in say 15 years, maybe 20 years, when these large scale battery energy storage systems have reached the end of their useful life. Obviously, they include some precious metals and things like that, and we want to be able to recycle as much as possible. And so those facilities are starting to pop up, which is great. if it's a, a residential homeowner who has their own individual, small battery system for their house, I honestly don't know what the steps are to get rid of that, on your own. I'm sure one of my colleagues probably has a better answer for that. I just personally don't know. But overall, recycling facilities are happening, and we even have one in New York, which I think is great.
Okay. And I did just post a link to the New York State DEC's product stewardship landing page, which has some information on that as well for anyone that might be interested. I just had one more question that came in. Can we use town landfills for these projects?
Yes, the town landfills tend to be, in the grand scheme of things, they're relatively small. So they're typically sized to maybe host a community solar project between maybe 1 to 5 megawatts. You're not going to see the large utility scale projects able to fit there. But yeah, plenty of towns have cited solar projects on their old capped landfills, and it's honestly a great use of land. Perfect. And in fact, if you do have a large closed landfill that you're looking to do a project on, reach out to us. NYSERDA has a relatively new, just within the last couple of years, a relatively new program called Build Ready. And it's essentially a small team at NYSERDA that's acting as a renewable energy developer, purposely trying to find underutilized lands like landfills, brownfields, old industrial areas that just aren't being used, and planning renewable energy projects, mostly solar, but we're not limited to solar, and doing all of the legwork, getting the project permitted with the town, packaging all the plans and permits up, and then auctioning them off to a private company to actually build and operate going forward. But yeah, so in summary, if you have either landfills or other underutilized lands in your town that you would be interested in trying to get solar on, reach out, and I'm happy to hook you up with the Build Ready folks and see if there's something that they can do.
And I
You can
just
also
posted a
just
link
put out
to,
an RFP for yourself as well. In the solar guidebook, we have a municipal procurement toolkit. So you can always just put an RFP out that says, hey, we have this, closed landfill, who wants to build a solar project on it? And you can just lease the land out, collect lease payments, and it's very simple. You don't have to do all the complicated work, right? So there are a few different options there.
thank you.
Hello, I'm not sure how to raise my hand to ask a question, if I can.
That's okay.
Oh, okay. What is NYSERDA's general opinion on the community solar? There's a lot of push for that, even door to door in my community, and based on recommendations, is that a valuable source to help with the clean energy?
Yeah, I'm not technically a spokesperson, but I would say, I think it's pretty safe to say that NYSERDA supports community solar. We provide funding for those projects. It's a great option for folks that maybe don't have roof space, or you have big trees blocking it, or you just, for whatever reason, don't want to put solar directly on your house. Maybe you're a renter, for example, and it's great. I do it myself. In fact, I'm subscribed to a community solar project. I'm like in a little, townhome in the middle of Albany. There's not a ton of room to put stuff. So I subscribed to a community solar project nearby, and I just get those credits on my utility bill. And if there's any question as to, whether someone knocking on your door or who sent you a flyer, if you want to know if their project is legitimate and they're not a scam, it's probably not, but I can understand why people are nervous about that. We have a list of community solar projects on our website, so you can find one near you just through our website, and that way it's legitimate.
Great, thank you for the answer.
Yeah. Let me see if I can even find the link to paste in there.
And I did paste a link into chat on the Build Ready program as well. So if there's any officials out there that have old brownfields or landfills or whatnot that they might be interested in seeing what can be done with them, the Build Ready link is in the chat, and you can link up with the Build Ready team through that.
And I just also pasted a link to our community solar page it's just like the landing page. And if you navigate through, there's a big blue button on there that says find a qualified solar project. And that's where you can actually start looking to find an actual project near you that you could sign up for.
Can I speak for a minute?
Sure.
I also joined one of those community solar things, and I have not received a bill for a couple of months. So I called the electric company and they said that they're still ironing out all of that stuff with giving the credits,
Yeah.
and that that is something that people should be made aware of, because, you know, if you don't continue to pay something, you're going to wind up with $1,000 bill at the end of, you know, them figuring it out.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no, that is a good point. And I know when I first signed up for mine, I think it was a few months. It might not have even been, you know, fully built and operational yet when, you know, we got people signing up. So there can be some delay there depending on the project. So good point.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I'll also
If the
say,
credits are showing up on your bill, but you're not being billed for your portion of the community solar, that's a little bit weirder. But if both of them, the credits and the bills, are delayed, that makes more sense to me.
Yeah, when
and I'll say, this is an issue that we've heard about from a few people recently. So I think that there's a couple of things that have been happening on the billing side from the local utility. They're preparing for a couple of big initiatives. One, the Public Service Commission last year authorized consolidated billing for community solar. So they're making that transition to make sure the credits and the billing is all coming on one invoice. They're also preparing for the rollout of smart meters and smart grid technology. And I had received an email from NYSERDA. Of course, that's for most of us, that's our local utility. I had received an email that said that they're switching the billing system, but it shouldn't impact end users. But that's when I started having issues on my own community solar credits and whatnot as well. So there may have been some issues with the switchover of the billing system from the utility and the community solar developers there. So if there are issues, just individual, I would highly recommend getting in contact directly with the utility as well as your third-party community solar provider to try to get that ironed out. So you're not alone, without a doubt.
Yeah.
It's been
Definitely a little complicated, but it is real.
Yeah.
I would just like to say that since this is a Sullivan County group, I do believe, I did sign up for it, but your solar farm is not necessarily in Sullivan County.
I live in
Right.
the town of Delaware. We have solar farms here. It's working great. Credits working, billing is fine. It's going really, it's just tremendous. So we're really happy with it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
mine
that's excellent.
is working fine, but the solar farm is in Orange County.
but
Yeah,
ours is-
yeah,
ours
that
is in
could be the
Delaware.
case.
Right.
Yeah, the grid doesn't follow municipal boundaries so much, but they are, even if not in the same county or in the same exact town, they're at least geographically somewhat nearby, because you can't even, the way it's set up, you can't sign up for one that's like outside of that portion of the grid, if you will. So hopefully
I think
it's
you have
not
to be
too
in the
far
same
away.
utility. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we don't have any other questions kind of outstanding. So I'm sure everyone's devastated to, you know, not spend the rest of the evening on training for tonight. But because Cassandra can correct me if I'm wrong, but you will all still receive your full 2 hours of training for the night. That's correct, Cassandra?
Yes, that is correct.
So, and I'm just want to say thank you so much to Jennifer for joining us tonight. We look forward to hearing from you or one of your team members in May about battery storage model laws. So we're excited about that one.
Awesome. We're excited as well. I never thought I'd have so much fun talking about batteries until this job, but they can be pretty cool.
So thank you again, Jen, and everyone. Like I said before, certificates will be going out in the next couple of weeks. and contact planning or go to the link in the chat above to register for next month's training. Thank you all again. Have a great night.
Thank
You too.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.